is a session. And if you don't want to be recorded, please turn your camera off. Thanks. Stephanie's going to share the collaborative notes one more time. If you haven't already clicked the link, please do so and put your name in the document. Welcome to the Concepts and Connections session for the Uptake of Digital Research Infrastructure Interest Group. My co-chairs, Stephanie Keathers and Kylie Black, are also here and are here to answer questions and get started on our session. Next slide. You've probably all seen this if you've been attending these sessions this week. Welcome to new RDA members. There's 6 guiding principles at the heart of the RDA. They are in detail on the RDA website, but those are openness, consensus, harmonisation, inclusivity, non-profit and technology neutral, and community driven. Next slide. Okay, so we just have a little bit of housekeeping. We do have the collaborative notes document, which we'll be using a fair bit today, particularly around getting your feedback on some key concepts. And when we get into the meaty bit of the meeting around case studies. So if you haven't already, please join the collaborative notes document and mute during the presentations that we will have. You've already met my co-chairs, Kylie Black and Stephanie Keathers. And we're also a little shout out to say that we are looking for more co-chairs, particularly in Europe and America. So if this is something that you are interested in, please reach out to one of us because we'd love to hear from you. Next slide. Okay, so this is today's agenda. We'll just do a quick background of the group and then we'll get into our presentations. We've got Kylie talking about the summary of the statement of work, and Stephanie will be talking about the progress against our work plan so far and the outcomes from the plenary in Costa Rica late last year. We'll also have a talk from CJ Woodford, who is part of the GORC interest group, and he'll be talking about how our 2 groups can work closely together, particularly around infrastructure categories and metrics. And then we'll get into the working part of our session, which includes finalising our key concepts, really around defining DRI and uptake, finalising the proposed categorisation of DRI, and then also progressing the work towards our survey of user groups. Next slide. Okay, so a little bit of a background to our group. Plenary 2021, it was put forward that there was interest in establishing some sort of uptake of digital research infrastructure group, in which case people said yes. In plenary 2022, the group worked towards establishing activities, drafting a statement of work, and also drafting what be the potential outputs and outcomes of the group if they did go ahead. Just before, I know we then had the plenary where they progressed further on this work around defining the uptake and categorisation of DRI, and our statement of work was approved, I think in late November. So we're working towards that now. We're up to plenary 24, which is today, where we're really going to be focusing on finalising the key concepts and proposed categorisation of DRI, and so progressing the survey of groups. Next slide. I'm going to hand over to Kylie.
Okay, thanks so much, Liv. So yes, we did quite a bit of work at Virtual Plenary 22 on the statement of work in preparation to submitting it to get this group endorsed by RDA. So the link to these slides is in the collaborative notes if you want to follow the links in there to the session description and the collaborative notes, or even to our statement of work, might even be more helpful. So we worked on the major components of the statement of work. So the use cases, the objectives and outcomes, our timelines and milestones, and of course the communities the group should engage with. And it's great to see people from those groups we want to be engaging with you today. Thank you very much, everyone. Our key outcomes, of course, were the draft statement of work, which, as Liv said, has now been endorsed by the RDA, and the list of groups to engage with. Next slide, please, Stephanie. Okay, so the key outputs of the group are going to be an environmental scan and literature review, and also a survey of different user groups. So we'll be working on the structure of that survey, who to survey, what sort of questions we want to ask them later on in this session. There's also going to be a typology of categories of digital research infrastructure. Again, we'll be looking at this later, and I believe CJ is going to be covering some of that in his talk as well. Our other outputs that we've nominated in the statement of work are the catalogue of qualitative and quantitative measures of uptake and recommendations for funders, providers and users of DRI. We've also listed a few outcomes there. So they're around this group establishing a common understanding about what digital research infrastructure uptake looks like, how it's going to be measured, use cases, and how that then helps evaluations and then impact further down the track. So to itemise those, one of our outcomes is an agreed model for understanding DRI uptake and use, which will lead to higher quality evaluations due to an improved set of use and uptake measures and metrics. It leads to a common understanding of DRI uptake and how that is demonstrated, with that understanding being a key step in the pathway between DRI outputs, outcomes, and then impact. Next slide, please, Stephanie. And over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. So just very briefly, I just wanted to summarize what we've done so far. So the statement of work was finalized after the virtual plenary 22 and was submitted in, I think, late October 2024. And it got endorsed over Christmas. So we got the endorsement in January 2025. So what we had listed in the statement of work as planned outputs were, as Kylie said, the environmental scan and literature review. And the status of that is we have created a Zotero library that is fairly empty at the moment, but we've started collecting things to put in there, and any contributions would be very gratefully received. So we're happy to provide you access to that. The survey of different user groups, we did some initial brainstorming at the plenary in Costa Rica, and the typology of categories of research infrastructure, we also did a bit of brainstorming at P23. We'll show you or talk a little bit about the results because we want to build on those in this session. And then the catalogue of qualitative and quantitative measures of uptake, we haven't done anything around that yet because we want to finalize the definitions before we start with that. And then finally, the recommendations for funders, providers, and users of DRI, that's not yet started. That's going to be a later step. Probably to emphasize that these are things we want to do as the first things for the interest group. If the interest group continues for a longer time, there will probably be other outputs that we will discuss and come up with as a group in general. So just very, very briefly, we'll talk, as I said, a little bit more about this in detail. So at the Costa Rica plenary, we had a session and used Mentimeter to collect responses to basically 3 questions. What do you see as uptake of digital research infrastructure? That's the yellow posted notes over there. What do you see as categories of digital research infrastructure? That's the pink ones down there. And what questions should we ask about key use cases? And that's the green ones. So we basically collected those with Mentimeter and then translated them into Miro to just collate them and group them following the session. Okay, so as the next steps based on these results in this session, as Liv has already said, we want to finalize the definition of key concepts, finalize a proposed categorization of the digital research infrastructure, and also progress the survey of different user groups to make sure that we actually capture all user groups or personas that we should, and also brainstorm with you more questions that we should ask those people. And I think that would be it up to now. Any questions at this point or any comments? If not, Françoise, yes? You're on mute. At least I can't hear you. Okay, that was an interesting audio effect. Was anyone able to hear that? Because I wasn't.
No, it sounded like a penguin gargling underwater.
Yes, thank you,
Thanks.
Françoise. That would be great. Sorry about that, but that was really difficult.
While we wait for that question to come through, was there any other comments or questions related to the work so far, or?
Oh, okay.
Okay, just for everyone's benefit, Francoise has linked to another working group with Force 11 in terms of data usage typologies, which started in January.
That is very interesting. I wasn't aware of that, so we should definitely look at that. Thanks, Françoise. Ah, even better. So Françoise is a member, so that means we can pick your brains about it as well. That's great. Okay. Yes, we'll definitely have a look at that. Any other questions or comments? If not, I would attempt to play CJ's video. Let me know if the sound doesn't come through, please.
Hi all, thank you for coming to this particular session. My name is CJ Woodford. I am a co-chair of the Global Open Research Commons Interest Group, as well as the International Implementations Working Group. And I'm excited to talk to you about areas of potentially complementary work between our groups and the Uptake and Digital Research Infrastructure Interest Group. I won't be there in person to continue the discussion, but I'm excited to hear back from my co-chair, Andrew Trillar, who is there in person and will be able to facilitate the discussion moving forward. Before we dive into areas of complementary work, I'd like to very quickly introduce the GORC in case you haven't heard of it before. The Global Open Research Commons, or GORC, is intended to be a connection between research commons, such that there's frictionless access to all research objects anywhere at all times to everyone with the appropriate security and privacy protocols in place. This discussion on how do you get to open science on this grand scale or open research on this grand scale led to the Global Open Research Commons interest group within the RDA and their goal of creating a roadmap of how do we actually get to the GORC. In those discussions, determining what or how you would need to get there, questions of what, as I just said, arose. However, this was kind of too much for the interest group to handle on its own. And so it was decided to create working groups to help address this question of what do you need before how do you get there? And so the idea of determining attributes and characteristics of commons that they might consider to then be ready to be implemented or integrated or become part of and participate in something like a global open research commons was the intent of the GORC groups, and in particular define a model that determine what those are. So the Global Open Research Commons international model, which is what you might consider, feeds into the roadmap, which is how do you do it? And then that gives you the GORC. It seems like an easy two-step process, but of course there's more to it. The Global Open Research Commons interest group supporting outputs include the typology and definitions, which tell you the essential elements of a commons. So that includes governance structures, engagement, sustainability, rules of participation and access, standards and conventions, human capacity, ICT infrastructure, services and tools, and research objects. The typology and definitions go into more depth, of course, but the essential crux of it is that a commons would need to have something in each of these essential elements to be considered a commons. Maybe more in some areas than others, but the idea would be that you need to have something in each one. What in each one? It was the work of the Global Open Research Commons International Model Working Group, which produced a model, very specifics in terms of what you would need to have in each essential element, or what you might consider in each essential element to become part of the GORC. And this was released as a supporting output in 2023 and then resubmitted as a recommendation in 2024. It also has an accompanying narrative report, which is a little easier to digest if you haven't looked at these outputs before. So I'd recommend starting with the report and then going back to version 1.1 spreadsheet if you can. The model is structured such that it has categories and subcategories, as well as their associated attributes and characteristics. And it's not a checklist. It's not prescriptive. It's intended to be what in each essential element works best for your particular context, and then some information around there, and then you would look at how would you implement it. This actually is what has led to our new working group, the Global Open Research Commons International Implementations Working Group, who's going to meet right after in the next breakout session after this group, actually, where we're going to be looking at how do you kind of implement the model. So from our perspective, what are some areas of overlap with the Uptake and DRI group, and where can we work together? The first one is key performance indicators, or KPIs and metrics. This is part of the international model, and we'd really like to work together on this. Maybe that's through a task force, or maybe that's passing KPIs and metrics completely to this interest group. We'd like to figure out what that looks like and what your appetite for that is. Commons types is actually the first deliverable of the GORC2 working group, and we noticed that was kind of similar to some of the work that intended for this group as well. So we'd really like to make sure that we're working together on what those words mean and what those vocabularies might look like. And so that could lead to something like a task force to work on this together, or maybe we just interact and interrelate between different deliverables, or maybe we're just aware of each other's work and we align our definitions. So that's all up for discussion on exactly what this looks like. KPIs and metrics are part of our glossary and have their own tab in the international model for version 1.1, and they're related to specific items in the model. Things that we'd like to do moving forward with it is maybe have a hierarchical relationship between KPIs and metrics, as well as identify some more granular metrics, especially for ICT infrastructure. We did identify 5 main themes, which included governance and policy, engagement with stakeholders, feedback from and satisfaction of your stakeholders, infrastructure and technology, as well as stakeholder engagement with that infrastructure and technology. These are mutually exclusive right now, but again, through further work, they might not be. What this looks like very quickly in our model, if you go all the way to the end of the spreadsheet, and you can in fact leave comments in here, so please do if you notice things in particular you'd like to leave comments on. Everything is organized into a theme. We tell you whether it's a KPI or a metric in the next column. It's got a statement, and then every single item in here has extended description and examples, a consideration level of how important it might be, where we found it, what level of infrastructure it might need to be. So if it's just starting up, developing, established, or expanding, what kind of information you might need for it, and where it relates to things in the model. So in particular, what essential elements, and if possible, what items. So usually a category or an attribute, and the reasoning behind that. I led the vast majority of that analysis, and so I am really keen to have feedback on it. So feel free to put in comments or contact me directly on it, or we can continue to have these discussions between our 2 groups to learn more. The other thing is commons types. As I said, this was one of our first deliverables here, and it was something that was worked on quite a bit in the GORC International Model Working Group, although it was never publicized because we didn't have time or capacity to kind of cross-check this with a speaker series. Which is who it's based on. So, we didn't want to publish things without people being aware of it. And so this is the basis for a lot of the GORC2 outputs. And what we'd like to do with these is to actually have them confirmed by the end of May. So working on them today in the 24th plenary, and then confirming them in our monthly meeting that's going to be starting in May. And then once that's done, we can then start actually doing the real work of profiles and mappings between commons. There are 5 dimensions of commons type that we've identified: maturity, weight class, service level, reach, and approach. This is kind of different than a specific type. So we've got now 5 dimensions of types. So it would only be a slice across these dimensions that would tell you a particular type. So you'd need a value in each one to say this is a particular type of commons. A little more complicated, but it's how we felt it best represented what the commons were doing. This is a 3D representation of what this looks like for the speaker series. Again, not vetted by the speaker series. This is by analysis only, but showing you IBICT because it seems like that might be a little more accurate based on some of the feedback I've gotten so far. IBICT in Brazil, they're mature commons. They've been around for a little while. They are a heavyweight, so they have quite the capacity, quite a lot of staff. They offer a breadth of services, and their service level is collected. So they offer some things in-house, and they also aggregate services from outside. They're green, which means national, so they are not discipline specific. And they're a little circle, which means that they do both community building and infrastructure building at the same time. So that's our 5 dimensions all captured in there. So in this case, IBICT would be one type of infrastructure or one type of commons, and others could be like IBICT. So some questions for discussion you might want to consider on KPIs and metrics are what themes of the KPIs and metrics kind of resonate with uptake and DRI. If some of them don't, how we might split or move or work together on these. So really interested in figuring out, like, do they move to uptake and DRI? Do some of them stay with GORC, and what can that look like? And then for commons types, are these the types of commons or types of DRI that you were kind of thinking of? And if not, what were you thinking? Do our definitions line up, or can they be complementary to each other? We have also done a little bit of work thinking around DRI types as well, if that's a little bit more specific to what you were thinking of regarding data lakes and platforms. So really interested in talking more around that piece. Other than that, those are our thoughts, and we're really interested in hearing from the discussion here today. Please consider coming to our breakout session if it's not too late for you. And you're also welcome to contact me directly. My emails are there on screen. Thank you. Hi all, thank you for coming to this particular.
That was the presentation by CJ about the work of the GORC, and particularly how we can collaborate between groups. We do have Andrew Trelaw here, who is a co-chair of GORC, who's able to answer questions and feedback from CJ's presentation. So any questions?
And I should say I'm very aware that CJ has just romped through in 5 minutes 18 months worth of quite detailed work, and a very, very large and elaborate underlying spreadsheet. For those of you that are traumatized by the brief sight of the spreadsheet that you got, you'll be pleased to hear that one of the pieces of activity for the GORC International Implementations Working Group, the follow-up to the group that CJ mentioned, one of the pieces of follow-up work is for us to take that spreadsheet and turn it into something that's much more user-friendly and interactive. But for now, it's all in a spreadsheet with many, many, many tabs. Sorry, if that's you, Francoise, you're still a penguin. I'm really sorry.
Stephanie, I think your audio is not great.
Oh, I blamed the wrong person. Apologies. Nope. You are now the penguin, Stephanie.
Andrew, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Can you talk potentially a little bit about the joint task force and what that might involve and how people might get involved if that's something of interest to them?
Yeah, thanks, Liv. That's a great question. So one of the things that, I mean, as CJ mentioned, we have the GORC session later this evening, well, starting at midnight Australian time. And part of what we're going to be doing in that session is mapping out our program of work through to October 26th, which is when that working group is scheduled to finish. Part of that will almost certainly involve a series of task groups working on things within the GORC working group, as well as what we're calling task forces, which work across the GORC working group and other groups. So we have a number of groups that we are looking to collaborate closely with. And involves more early on in chat referenced a group called Muldreth, which had their presentation midnight this morning, my time. And they're focused on looking at the ecology of tools and services around research data. So there's a number of possible joint task forces there. Similarly, if it looks like Uptake of DRI and GORC are both tackling questions of definition or questions of kinds of commons, then there's scope for potential joint activity there rather than us going along separate train lines that we then try and merge towards the end. In terms of how the joint task force might happen, it's probably easiest if people just email me. I'll put my email address, or my email address is in the collaborative notes document. So if people would like to email me to express their interest in being on a joint task force, then let's feed that into the discussion that we'll be having later on, and let's see if we can construct groups that can jointly get together on this and hopefully come up with a shared set of terms and definitions for those terms. And Stephanie notes in chat, we should definitely make sure our definitions align.
Good point. Okay, any questions, comments? You can feel free to pop them in the Zoom chat as well.
Yes, and if they don't align, we should say why not. And one of the reasons why they might align is that we're trying to solve different problems for different user communities, but let's at least have the conversation first.
Terrific. All right. Thanks, Andrew, for coming along and representing GORC. And thanks to CJ when you see him for preparing that video. That was really informative, if a little bit squishing 18 months worth of work into 5 minutes. Okay, so that concludes the presentation section of today's meeting. So we're going to move on to the working session and group activities. A lot of this work will be done in the collaborative notes. So if you haven't already, please log on to the collaborative notes so that you can join in the conversation. I'm just going to run you through the next 3 slides before we jump into the collaborative notes together. And this is really around finalising the definitions of our key concepts and particularly around digital research infrastructure and what uptake means. So the 3 statements here come from different organisations across the globe. We've got one from Canada, one from Europe, and another one from Australia around what digital research is. And in a minute, so just let you guys read that. there will be a space in the collaborative notes to comment against that. Are we missing anything? Have we not got it right? Do we need to think about digital research infrastructure differently? So we'll jump into that very soon. I'll just go to the next slide, Stephanie. Okay, and at the last plenary in Costa Rica, we did this session around what do you see as uptake of digital research infrastructure, and all those little post-it notes were what our different attendees said they believed uptake meant to them. And we've tried to categorize that in, or cluster them into groups. And from that, next slide, we've come up with this sort of definition and possible categories and what they mean. So I'll give you a moment to read through that. It's also in the collaborative notes. We really want to ensure that this is right, that we're capturing uptake in what people believe it is. Have we missed anything? Do we need, should things be removed? Have we not got it right? So we'll jump into the collaborative notes now, Stephanie, or
Yep, I'll share my screen with the collaborative
yeah.
note. Yep.
Okay. So are there any questions around those definitions? Is there anything that jumps out at you that's missing that we haven't thought of?
More importantly, is that big enough? Would people like me to enlarge the text?
Maybe make it a bit bigger.
Yeah. I can see Andrew's got his hand up.
So I don't think there's anything missing, but I would just point out for the benefit of non-Australian people on the call that the Australian definition explicitly includes the experts needed to run the infrastructure, which is not the case for the Canadian definition or the European definition. And I think that's important because the experts, without the experts, the infrastructure is not going to be particularly usable or well maintained. And in fact, one of the key ideas that's come out of the last 15 years of work in Australia on national digital research infrastructure has been this idea of people as infrastructure. Well, data as infrastructure and people as infrastructure. And I think it's important to, in the context of an uptake of DRI, to point out that for Australians at least, we would see the people, in fact, many of whom are co-chairs on this particular call, as a critical part of the infrastructure.
I think it's interesting that that's reflected, excuse me, in the titles as well. So with the first one from Canada and also in the European strategy, those definitions are about digital research infrastructure, whereas the Australian one is the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy. It doesn't have the word digital in there. So yeah, it's even hinted at in the title, which I find very interesting, different perspectives on what infrastructure is. Stephanie, Liv and I noticed this a couple of months ago, and we had a little bit of a conversation about whether people are considered digital research infrastructure or not. We'll just go with infrastructure, I think.
Thanks, Kylie. I would encourage you to put any comments or questions into the collaborative notes, or speak up about any of this. Should we go down to the uptake, which I think maybe is might elicit a bit more conversation around what uptake is. I think it's been one of the hardest things for us to define beyond just the adoption of digital research infrastructure. So we've obviously got the adoption by researchers, the integration of DRI into research workflows, collaboration and data sharing, research outputs, innovation and efficiency, and capacity building and training, as well as that policy investment support, which came up quite a bit at the Costa Rican plenary. Yes, what types of users? Yes. Who's typing that in? Do they want to talk to that?
Who's the anonymous fox? Oh, is that Stephanie?
I mean, I think that's a really important point, that we tend to focus on uptake of DRI by researchers alone, but as Stephanie correctly points out, there are a range of other kinds of users or the categories of users that might want to use DRI. So citizen scientists or the general public is an example that Stephanie's put in there. Another one that I would add there would be government for policy purposes. In fact, some of the DRI use cases for infrastructure that my organization is developing are intended for policy purposes or indeed for government response. I'm thinking here about biosecurity, where the DRI is being used to make decisions about quarantine and isolation of pests. And then the third category that I would add in there would be industry. So again, at least in Australia, there's increasing talk about the need for translation of research results into industry, and uptake of by industry of research outputs.
What do you mean by industry, Andrew?
Oh my goodness.
Commercial?
Commercial industry, yes. I mean, I if I were asked to define industry, I'd put it as general as non-government organizations that build things or deliver services. But certainly the use of academic DRI, research DRI by non-research users is something that's increasingly being talked about. I know Michelle has her hand up, so I'll shut up.
We'll move to Michelle now.
Thanks. Yeah, I would add another adopter group being the other infrastructures. So you need the repositories and registries, any other infrastructure that with which interoperability is beneficial, but also that the other infrastructures note your existence and tell other people about it and integrate or align and make you an important part of the ecosystem. So I don't know, I wouldn't call them users, but I'd call them adopters.
And that would be different to say collaboration and
I mean, I think they can be collaborators and you're actively discussing with them how that interoperability happens. But if the ecosystem's big enough, then you're not going to have all those conversations. It's just going to be some other infrastructures around the world that, pick up that yours exists and offer, linkage to it in some way without ever talking to you.
Yeah. Francoise has a comment in the chat. Private sector is more neural than industry.
I think it's meant to be neutral, and I agree.
Neutral? Oh, neutral. Neutral.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments at this stage?
Maybe around the suggestion there of research outputs.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to expand a little bit on that? I mean, obviously being RDA, we're looking at data, publications. How far do we want to go, I guess, in terms of discussing what research outputs we're looking at around uptake?
Are you going to go back and cover integration of DRI into research workflows and collaboration and data sharing?
Yeah, or we could just do it in order. Should we go with the integration of DRI into research workflows then? That's an interesting idea. Just remove the word research to make it more general.
It's kind of a scope question, I guess.
And maybe
Yeah.
it's just that leading sentence, you know, the extent to which research communities and institutions, well, we can change that.
Stephanie notes in chat that maybe we just need to look beyond researchers using the DRI, which then kind of applies to a number of these dash points.
Yeah. Okay, I'm
That's
just conscious.
if you take out the word research, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more general.
Yep.
I'm just conscious that we have 2 more minutes before we jump into the next section. So do we want to just quickly pop through the others? Anyone had any comments? Particularly around research outputs, innovation and efficiency, and capacity building and training. Or there might have been one more around policy as well, further down.
So innovation and efficiency, they don't feel to me like uptake measures. They feel like, oh, I don't know, maybe they do. I was going to say they feel more like consequences of uptake rather than
But would
uptake
you
themselves.
yeah, okay. But you might, because of better uptake, you might have quicker or you know, that enablement of faster research. I'm not trying to say fast research. The words escape me at the moment.
Are you kind of saying, Andrew, that it's further along the impact pathway than just uptake?
I wasn't, but that's a more elegant way of saying part of what I was saying. I think what I'm stumbling over is the preamble to that series of dash points, you know, the sentence, the extent to which research communities, etc., including colon. It's trying to work out how you would read innovation and efficiency after that colon. I mean, yes, Francois, outputs are a consequence of usage. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm just conscious that we are running over time a little bit, so we might move on to the next section. Those collaborative notes will be open. So if you have time and to provide some input or some comments around that, that would be great. We're going to move into the next section, which is around finalising the proposed categorisation of DRI.
Thanks so much, Liz. Stephanie, if you're able to share the slides, that would be fantastic, please. Fantastic. Thanks so much. So yeah, for the next little bit, it would be good if we could put our heads together around the categorisation of digital research infrastructure. So CJ was already talking about this in GORG and already mentioned the idea of having a task force to work on that together. So I've actually just practically added that to the collaborative minutes to think about, you know, how that might work. But just backtracking a little bit, we've been doing some thinking about this categorisation of DRI, and we've looked at the input that was received at the last plenary through the Menti that we've collaborated into the Miro board. Of course, the GORK model, had a good look at that. And we've also been looking at the State of Open Infrastructure report to see if they had, I guess, a different perspective on it that might inform how we might like to categorise digital research infrastructure. Next slide, please, Stephanie. Okay, so this was the input we received at the last plenary. So we've grouped the responses into 3 groups, as you can see there. So the first one was types of categories, and a theme that came up a lot in that was coverage. So local, national, institutional, subject-specific based infrastructure. There was also types of tools and services in the big box down the bottom, including things like system identifiers. And then there was the other group, and we had quite a few comments saying, look at GORK, which we most certainly have done. Next slide, please, Stephanie. Okay, so I looked at the services and tools tab in the GORK model, which is linked there, and tried to extract just that little bit of information to make it a little bit digestible. So I've reproduced their categories and subcategories. So like I said, this was on the services and tools tab. So they've got several categories there and there's subcategories. So there's one around research object repositories, including data repositories, publications, research software and semantic objects. There's discovery services. So the Australians on the call, something like Research Data Australia, which harvests from other repositories, and I'm sure there's lots of international equivalents. Then there's the services and tools for direct research tasks. So things like data acquisition, analysis, processing, visualization, data collection and research object management. And then there's services and tools that enable workflows and middleware. Persistent identifier services also came up as its own category. Also data management services and tools came up. Then there was the commons catalogues of services and tools, including those hosting research objects, with the subcategory of a registry of repositories. The next one was the security and identification services, including authentication authorization, so things like access protocol translation and remote access. And then I thought it was really interesting that the GORK model had a separate category for help desk. Now, I've been trying to, actually, Andrew, you might be able to give me a little bit of insight on this. I'm not entirely sure how a help desk is a separate category of research infrastructure, because I was thinking that a help desk would be support for all those other categories and subcategories of research infrastructure. So, yeah, a little bit of confusion on that one.
Yeah, I think so first of all, this is a work in progress. So it's version 1.1, we're working towards version 2. It may well be that disappears as part of that rework. The thinking for that one was that we saw the help desk as an underpinning enabling service that would support, as you correctly point out, support all of those other services, but that there are a number of organizations that run a central help desk for multiple services rather than each of those ones having their own help desk.
Oh, I see. I didn't think of it that way. That makes sense. Thank you. Yeah. So next slide, please, Stephanie. Okay, so I extracted this information from last year's State of Open Infrastructure report. Now, in reading this, it really brought home the point to me that looking at digital research infrastructure and looking at open infrastructure are actually quite different things, even though, of course, there are areas of overlap. So if you look at table 1, which I've split into 2 there on the left, a lot of those types of open infrastructure categories are unique to this particular list. And some of them I'm not sure that we would probably include in digital research infrastructure with their research emphasis. So something like a submission system or even an open access or subscription management tool seems to be more tailored towards, making things open science, that kind of thing, as opposed to digital research infrastructure. But I think that's definitely something to discuss. They also had that circle chart that I've got there on the right, where they were breaking down the open infrastructures into the business form. Again, a different way of slicing and dicing. So we've got commercial for profit, the fiscal sponsorship and academic institution, the non-profits with fiscal sponsorship, the non-profits on their own. Other, of course, was a big category. And then they also had a volunteer community. So lots and lots of different ways of getting around or trying to define this problem and categorise these different types of infrastructure. So next slide, please. So knowing that we're working closely with the GORC people and that, we're probably going to be collaborating in some shape or form, I thought, right, let's try to put these together. And one way of going about this, because it may not be the best way, is I thought if we could use the GORC model to inform what we come up with, that could work very well. And I wondered if that there may be some ways to group together the categories coming from GORC. So I've tried to colour code them there. So what I'm trying to indicate there is that research object repositories, discovery services, and the commons catalogue would all be one group around repositories. And then another grouping might be services and tools. So there's the 2 categories there, the direct research tasks, and also for those that enable workflows in middleware as another category. Then persistent identifier services as its own, data management services and tools as its own, and then the security and identification services as its own category as well. So in fact, if we just jump to the next slide, we can see that listed. So that's kind of a first pass at what might be a functional categorisation of DRI. Since the very beginning in this group, we have been talking about funders and publishers, certainly as groups that would be interested in uptake of digital research infrastructure. But I don't think anybody's going to be calling funders and publishers infrastructure, although, as I say, that publishers, might be up for grabs. Another thing that came up was that in the feedback from P23, compute and analysis actually came up several times in the feedback from the group, but I couldn't see it named, at least not in that exact language in the GORC model. So that might be something to consider as well. I think CJ's already highlighted in his talk, and I've mentioned it as well. There's lots of different ways of categorising digital research infrastructure. This may be functional. CJ mentioned maturity, weight class, service level, reach, and approach in his talk. Are there any others that we might want to include? I've actually listed those in the collaborative notes. So should we do a similar thing to what Liv did with the definitions jump into the collaborative notes now and maybe just have a think about this and a discussion as a group. I can see Francois has already put a comment in. So Stephanie, if you could stop sharing and I'll share the collaborative notes again, thanks. Okay, Francoise, I can see you've noted their compute analysis network provision are not NRENs a DRI. I'm sorry, my brain's probably fading. What exactly is an NREN, Francoise? Ah, thanks, Andrew. Yep, net. Yep, absolutely.
Is it better if I speak through this mic?
Yes, we can hear you
Okay.
loud and clear. Thanks, Francoise.
I feel better. Now I can shout inside the meeting instead in the chat.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Yay.
We're working, yay.
Thanks.
Okay. Just in the interest of time, I'm the timekeeper, so I better finish my section on time. Can we maybe just, Francoise?
Before we move on, I would like to insist on the fact that if I take my national hat, my French hat, we have to have compute and analysis because it's at the core of the research, the digital infrastructure as we think about that.
Andrew, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I've been wondering about that question about compute and analysis in Gork. Just wondering if you had any perspective on that.
As in, why do we group it together?
Yeah, or sort of where does it fit within the Gork model, I guess?
So, in two places, if I'm understanding your question correctly.
Yeah.
So one of the essential elements, one of the hexagons, is the underpinning ICT infrastructure. So the compute, the network, the storage, the access and authentication infrastructure, and depending on what kind of organization you work for, you're upset by one or more of those, that they're all grouped together. But we had to kind of try and keep the number of hexagons down to a reasonable size. So all of the underpinning hardware and associated software sits inside one hexagon. So that's if you like the hardware kit that you need to do the analysis. But then the other place that it sits is in the services and tools hexagon, which is of course the software that runs on the hardware that lets you actually do the analysis. what the Muldroth group is, one way of thinking about what the Muldroth group is doing is they're taking that services and tools hexagon and zooming in on it or expanding it out so that you can see all of the complexity that's going on inside that. And certainly analysis is one of the elements within that Muldroth expanded version of services and tools. It's important to note that the Gork model, certainly the essential elements bit, the hexagons that most people are familiar with, are at a very high level because they're trying to cover a whole lot of things, both social and technical. And so that for a lot of the technical issues or technical elements within DRI, you need to zoom in on one or more of the hexagons.
Thank you. Okay. So there's types of categorization. So there's quite a lot to unpack there. And I've itemized the Gork levels. Looks like someone's just typed it in there. Is this the same as reach in the Gork model? So talking about coverage. So I think you might have answered that, Andrew.
I think coverage and reach are, yes, I think they're the same, noting that coverage could mean geographical coverage or discipline coverage. So you have to be careful about what kind of coverage you mean.
It was actually meant as national, international, institutional, that sort of thing as well. So you have multiple different axes, if you like, of coverage, I think.
Yep, and also pan-national, because we have to keep referring to things like the EOSC, which I think
Yes.
the consensus seems to be is described as pan-national.
Mm-hmm. So, sorry, I should know this, but the reach that Gork talks about, that what does that cover?
My brain's fading. I've had too many midnight meetings this week.
Sorry.
Give me a minute and I'll look it up for you.
Yeah, great, thanks.
While Andrew's looking that up, I really appreciate it if we could just have some thoughts on how we can work with Gork on this. It seems to me like Gork and Muldroth are the two obvious groups to work with, and I think having some kind of task force that, you know, CJ was talking about makes an awful lot of sense. Andrew, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so reach, I'm not sure this is going to help you, Stephanie. Reach in the Gork model refers to the user base and the stakeholders and the audience scope. So it's focused on the people that are using the commons, but the current definition is defined in terms of a domain axis and a geographical axis. So the facets, and I'm not convinced, by the way, I believe this set of facets yet. We're having this discussion later on tonight. But the facets are, is it a domain-specific commons? Is it a national commons, which is clearly orthogonal to whether it's domain-specific or not? Or is it a pan-national and international? As I say, I'm not convinced I believe that those are the three right facets, but at the moment, Gork is thinking of reach both in terms of domain reach and geographical reach.
So that might be something where we can have a chat about what we think coverage might mean, what you think, and
Yes.
what Muldroth thinks, and then we can probably bring those together.
Yeah, and I think that would be very useful. I think it'd be very good if we're all talking about the space in the same terms.
Or if not, define crosswalks.
Oh,
Yeah, terminology crosswalks. Oh, or we could just agree on that we're all going to talk about the same thing. But yes, crosswalks as a last.
So yes, we've got the question there. How should we work with Gork and Meldris on this? Someone's just typing come up. Oh, so come up with some kind of agreement like this. Yeah, absolutely. So yes, certainly for our group, we were looking at starting some monthly meetings after this particular plenary to progress the work. But I mean, maybe what that might look like, certainly in terms of these definitions, is joining forces with Gork and Meldris to pursue this work rather than going out on our own and possibly duplicating what other groups are doing. Okay, Stephanie, I am mindful of the time and I know you want to start focusing on the survey. Oh, Andrew, sorry, I won't cut you off. Go ahead.
No, sorry, I was naughty. I put my hand up after you started talking. I'm just reminded of work that was done very early on, in fact, predating the formation of RDA, that Stephanie might remember, the DFT, Data Foundation Terminologies Group, which was an attempt to come up with an agreed set of terms that we were all going to use across RDA. Didn't actually work like that, but it might actually be worth going back to the DFT group to see if there's anything there that we can usefully mine. I'll dig up a link.
Great idea.
Yeah, I should have a link as well somewhere if you can't find it, Andrew.
So things like this, if you have any other suggestions, maybe just pop them in the collaborative notes so that we can follow up. And we might move on to the next section.
Right, I will stop sharing the collaborative.
Okay, has that come through?
Yep.
Excellent. So the final thing we wanted to do in this session was to progress the survey questions. And please let me know if my audio breaks up again. I don't know that. I don't hear it. So just from our statement of work, we basically identified 3 different user categories or personas and what they might be interested in finding out about Uptake, or why they would be interested in finding out things about Uptake. So just to look through this, so from our statement of work, we had funders who would be interested in making sure the digital research infrastructure is attractive to its potential user community, whichever that might be, researchers or others, getting credit and recognition for the funding, making the DRI sustainable, and in particular sustainable without having to provide ongoing funding, and getting a tangible return on investment. For users, a couple of things we came up with, that they were interested in assessing if they should use this DRI and what the costs and benefits are, and in particular if this DRI will be there in the long run. And also finding out how to best use this DRI and any tips and tricks to make this easier for the user. And then for providers, we had some overlap with what funders might want, including getting credit and gaining reputation for providing the DRI, understanding who uses it, for what and why, as well as why those who could use it do not. Sort of connected to that, understanding how to reduce barriers and increase uptake for users to use the DRI. And I note that we use the word uptake here. We should probably use something else, given that we haven't fully defined it yet. Providing low-cost help and assistance to users, attracting more funding to sustain the DRI and understand if the DRI is viable, and also how to close it down if it is not. So that was what we came up with in the statement of work. Now I can see their messages in chat, but I can't see them. So if there's anything there, please interrupt me.
I was wondering, I was proposing policymakers because I think about the people who define open science policies, for instance.
Yep,
and I was wondering, I was asking myself the same question as Andrew is asking in the chat. So it's not getting credit it's they needed to define, to check the, do you say pertinence? Pertinence,
Yes.
the fact that the policy they are defining, yes, they could be users and funders, but they can be policymakers by themselves, I mean. So this is why I'm wondering, you know, to orient the strategy definition and to check that the strategy is pertinent or not. And I am not completely sure it's exactly the same thing as the funders. Yes,
Andrew?
I agree with Michelle on that. So
So Michelle, I think, has made a very good point, which is that policymakers are not funders, and I would
Sure.
agree with Francoise that funders are also not necessarily policymakers. So I think they're related, but they're separate. A good example might be a country might have a national open science policy, and then another part of the government, let's say, might then be investing in infrastructure in support of that that policy. So I think I agree that they should be separate, and that should be another class of persona.
You can
So we
have
should-
you can have two different departments in the same ministry, for instance, and they do not have the same point of view.
I think you're right, and we should capture that in the notes if we can. Now,
Okay.
Yep, great, thank you. So when we brought this up in the session at the plenary in Costa Rica, we asked the audience what questions should we ask about key use cases, bearing in mind that we hadn't defined at that point fully what each user actually is. So we don't have a complete list of users, but we wanted to ask, okay, what should we ask about key use cases? And the categories that came up are on the screen. So DRI support, understanding users, researcher needs, barriers to adoption, outcomes and impact, sustainability, and key party engagements were the kinds of categories that they thought we should ask questions about. So just to continue the discussion, it would be great if we could again go to the collaborative notes document in a minute. And basically what we'd like you to add to is the questions, who are the different personas we should survey? So we've talked about users, funders, and providers. There's also potentially implementers, which again have some overlap with some of the others, but not necessarily fully. Trainers, and then Francoise, Michelle, and Andrew brought up policymakers. And then thinking about what should we ask each of those personas about the uptake of DRI? And are there generic questions we would want to ask everyone? So Kylie, I'll stop sharing. If you could share the notes document again. Thank you very much. So, okay, sorry, I just see a comment from Graham there. Okay, yes, that would be very good to have a look at. I'll just see, can we put that link and the information into the notes as well? Great, thank you very much. Oh, cool. I hadn't scrolled down far enough. That would be really useful. So if you wouldn't mind commenting on and adding things to those questions we have there. So first of all, we have added the policymakers, which is great. Are there any other sort of personas or user groups that we should survey? And also one question we also had was, do we need to refine that further? So for example, we talked about users and we talked about researchers, general public. We also talked about policymakers. Do we need to ask them different questions? Are they the same questions that we would want to ask them?
Do we have students? Are students the same as users? You know, because you have trainers.
Yeah.
And it can be a bit different to be someone learning as a user or someone who is just using.
Okay. Would you categorize them as a separate persona, or would you categorize them as a subgroup of users?
I think we can have them as a subgroup of users,
Yep.
but it may be not exactly the same question.
Okay. Yep.
I would not put policymakers in users because they
Okay.
oversee things. It's they are down there, so they are okay
Okay.
there.
I think what we have there is two different types of policymakers, because there are policymakers who are also users. So for example, we have a biosecurity project where some of the people making policy might want to use the resulting platform, which is a digital research infrastructure, to make policy decisions. So
Sorry,
yeah.
you're right.
No, but that doesn't mean that there aren't policymakers at the DRI level that are a different kind of category. So I'm just trying to work out how to distinguish between them.
No,
just
I
call
think
those.
it's just the way policymakers oversee or use, and it's not at the same level at all. So I think it's not the same kind of questions. But in the end, you may ask two types of questions to policymakers as users or as the people who define the strategies and policy. So, but it can be in the end that you decide to not to ask one question, to strategy define. Yes.
Okay. That's probably not the best wording we can come up with, but we can think about it. But I think we need to distinguish the two, even though they are sort of the same name. Okay. Any other users that sorry, not users, any other personas or user groups that we should survey that we haven't listed here? Oh, Francois, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
In the among the users, you can have communities.
Okay.
For instance, if you have a thematic infrastructure, you can think about the community as a user in addition to the individual people.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. And Michelle?
Michelle?
I don't know if this is useful, but you could think about the category of researchers who have to teach other researchers, the trainers who engage with it in a different way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Are you thinking that would be a subset of trainers, Michelle?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear, Carly. Am I?
Oh, were you thinking that researchers who have to teach would be a subset of trainers, or do you think that they're a separate persona on their own?
I think they're a separate persona, but for some reason I had it in my head you were just trying to keep it in three major blocks. So I'd put it in the kind of researcher grouping. Obviously, trainers aren't necessarily always researchers, but sometimes they are. Yeah, it depends how many personas you want.
Yeah, sorry, I think the three blocks came from the statement of work, and we sort of extended that a bit in our last plenary session. Okay. So it would be really interesting for us to also know what you think are questions we should ask those people, or these different personas. Sorry, I keep saying people.
So one thing we had in our statement of work was that we wanted to look at not only who is using the infrastructure, but who is not using it and why. So I guess, you could survey, I guess, a broad segment of the population about it and find out who's using it, who isn't, and see if there's questions, see if there's responses around that, or even just finding out, I guess, what people like about it or any problems they've had with it, and may give some insights into who isn't using it or what might be some barriers to them using the infrastructure.
Makes sense.
What should be in place to help you if there are barriers?
Sorry, can you say that again?
What should be in place to help you if there are barriers? It's the follow-up to barriers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. One thing that I'd be interested in is whether we should ask questions around sustainability, whether that is something that would be a relevant thing to ask pretty much all the user groups, whether there are questions around that. Andrew?
Sorry, I don't want to take us down a definitional rabbit hole with 6 minutes to go. But I spent an entire week at a Lawrence workshop last year trying to pin down what sustainability meant for
Okay.
for knowledge infrastructures, which are of course another kind of DRI. So what do you mean when you say sustainability, Stephanie? Sustainability of the DRI or the impact of the DRI on the environment or something else?
I was thinking of financial sustainability and also sustainability in terms of user numbers, or well, actually, no, not necessarily user numbers. I think I'm probably okay. I don't think I can provide you with a great definition of what I actually meant when I said that, but I think a lot of it is around the fact that we have a lot of projects that build something and then there's no ongoing support or funding. So it's the money, it's the people, it's potentially even the sort of promotion and things like that. Does that help?
Okay.
So that was less about the environmental sustainability.
Yeah. So I know Francois has got a hand up, but just
Yeah.
very quickly, the Gork model used to have sustainability as a dollar symbol. We have changed that to something more like a recycling symbol for a variety of reasons. Firstly, the dollar is problematic as a currency, and secondly, it's not just about the money. There's a range of other things. I'll put a link in the notes document. So Graham's already cited his work. I'll put a link in the notes document to a paper on sustainability that I gave at the DCC conference earlier this year, trying to tease out the various dimensions of sustainability.
Yep, thanks. That would be great, Francois.
Yes, I think there is a general question, which is what is your relation? I wrote in the chat, why are you using the GRIs? But I think the question should be adapted to each category. And it has to do with what is your relationship with DRIs. It's not eventually using them, but it's how do you relate to them?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's the starting point.
Yep. Yes. So why are you basically bothering with DRIs in a way?
Exactly.
Yep. Okay, thanks. Now, okay, yep. So we have only 3 minutes left.
There's just one more comment in the chat there as well.
Yep.
The
Yes.
underlying principle of all questions should be, how can the DRIs best serve research? This is most relevant for every group, and it can lead to conclusions about other aspects.
Okay, I've put that into the document. So, Emmanuel, were you just typing something?
Oh, I was not typing anything. So
Okay. I think I agree with the comment that the underlying principle should be, how can the DRI best serve potentially research and other use cases, I guess. So if you have a policymaker using it, how can they be served by the DRI? Would that be okay?
well, the point is that everything you have here,
Yep,
to some iteration serves the serves research in one or the other way, directly or indirectly. And
okay.
of course, funding is not only important for the research infrastructure, but also important for the sustainability. So whether people, and in the end, the researchers can rely on this infrastructure, and whether other services like PID services and so on support the research infrastructures to organize their data. However, in the end, it's all for the funder, for the policymaker, for everybody. It's what comes out there in terms of research, because it's most of it is a service for research, and I don't think we can deny that. I mean, even the funders, if you ask them what are their principles, they will say we're there to create better research. And so the question should be which. So I think what I would ask, let's say that what I would ask is, which of the research infrastructures do you like, and which aspects do you like? Which ones are essential for your work? And my suspicion is that for many researchers, the ideal infrastructure does not exist yet. I mean, we are starting to create that, and I think there's a lot of deficits that we will find there, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I struggle a little bit on what to. I think that's what most people here as well. We struggle a little bit on how to grasp that and how to get that into a survey that will really give us the answers that we want to know.
All right, thanks very much. We'll capture that in the notes. Now we are at time, so maybe we can just spend 1 minute on the last, basically the last slide, which is where to from here. And I'll be very quick with that. Liv, did you want to talk to that?
Oh, you keep going. You're on a roll.
Well, my audio works now. Okay, so where to from here? So as we are a newly established group, we would like to set up probably monthly meetings. So we will send out a doodle poll to the group. So if you haven't joined the group yet, please do so. Let us know if you're interested in co-chairing the group, especially if you're outside of Australia, because at the moment we're very heavily Australia focused, which is not what we want to be, but this is how the whole group came into being. And in one of the first interest group meetings, we would like to discuss the outputs from this session, maybe discuss how we can finalize the definitions, categories, and the draft survey questions. And we also want to start developing a communication strategy, including for the survey dissemination. And we will also want to do a session request for the next plenary, which is actually due in less than 2 weeks' time. So that doesn't leave us a lot of time to do that. We might have to do that via email / the group mailing list. And all input is very welcome from anybody. So thank you very much. Thanks for attending our session. Thanks for all your contributions. And we hopefully see you around at the plenary.